Thank you very much for joining. My name is Tomo Silva. I am the CEO and product specialist of ClicData. If you're a customer of ours, you probably have talked to me at some point in time. I do like to get my hands into data, all types of technical things related to data and our product, ClicData. So for those of you that are not our customers or are joining us for the first time, just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. Please use the chat. We have a moderator monitoring the chat, and they'll make sure that they'll raise my attention to anything that doesn't work as planned. Make sure that you can hear the audio and see the video properly. I'll be sharing my screen with a live demo after. Also, for those that are just joining, a few words about ClicData. We are a BI platform, fully cloud-based. We don't do on-premise. We do have partners in Latin America, Australia, and Asia. We have some partners actually joining us here today. We have offices, ClicData offices in Canada, in Arizona, and in Virginia. And we also have offices in Toronto, Canada, and of course, France, where our head office is located. We currently manage over 1 million KPIs, approximately just over 100,000 data sets, and we publish about 120,000 or so dashboards per hour. As well, you can see our ratings on GetApp and other software marketplaces. Again, the vision of ClicData has always been one to make sure that you guys can take benefit of your data. These days, your data is stored a little bit all over the place in cloud, in on-premise, on Excels. And our job is to make sure that you are able to get that data. It is your data, but we felt that sometimes you get locked into these systems and you're not able to really mash up the data as you want and prepare the data so that you can visualize it and have simple dashboards and simple reportings for you, for your employees, for your users, for partners, etc. And also all the tools around that to share and to publish that automatically. These are some of the examples of the dashboards you can create with ClicData. It's really a designer. It's up to you to really paint the dashboards either to your customers' needs or to your own needs with your corporate identity. Think of it as almost like a PowerPoint where you make it any color you want. And again, we try to increase our data connector ecosystem as much as possible so that the more intelligent we make our connectors, intelligent in order to connect to the different data sources and know what you're trying to achieve, the better it is for you, the easier it is for you. So we have some very intelligent connectors for some APIs, cloud APIs, and others which are basically just database connectors or CSVs, flat files, and things like that. We have over 50 native connectors, plus we have a web service connector that allows you to connect to at least another 200 apps, cloud APIs, and we have ODBC and a few others. And all else fails, you also have an email connector, which you can just send an email to dataload@clicdata.com with some security credentials with the data file attached to it, and it will load it in for you. So that's kind of just a brief overview of what ClicData does, and obviously there's a lot more behind the covers. But today we're really focusing around that data connectivity and the different ways that you can bring data in. There's been a lot in terms of discussions in terms of what is ETL, extract, transform, load, or is it extract, load, and transform? All these are just acronyms of things that people put together to try to explain what they do and the technology behind it. We talk a lot about data warehouses and OLAP and data lakes and those type of things. So we're going to just touch on that a little bit, maybe hopefully clarify some of that terminology. Then we're going to talk about how ClicData does, how we process the data, how we look at the data set that you have and then load it in. And I'm going to, through some very simple examples, very limited rows at least, explain how we do some loading, either full data loads or delta loads. And then, obviously I'm willing to take questions in terms of, deciding what is the best method for you to load your data. So again, we're talking about today just about the connection of ClicData. So the first thing to obviously address is how does ClicData load, extract the data from the different systems? How does it transform it? How does it load? And whether it's ETL or ELT or so forth. So we actually have kind of a different view on things. We can maybe think of ourselves some hybrid of these two. We want to connect to the different systems and bring a copy of the data as much as possible into ClicData. And we do that for several reasons. Number one is because it will be processed faster once it's on our side, on our data warehouse, which is in fact your data warehouse. We can process it a lot faster because it's on a database that we know. There's no, streaming of data slowly or paging like we do on APIs. It also breaks the need for you to rely on the data source. What that means is that if you one day want to publish your dashboard to 1,000 users, if the dashboards were still connected to your backend data source, all of a sudden your backend data source would just crawl to a standstill because you have 1,000 users asking for metrics on one site. So, so we create this middle layer, which is what people call a data warehouse. Now, in later years, after data warehouse, that terminology was widely used to signify different things for different people. Once again, but it meant ultimately that is a centralized location for all your company's data. Now, the concept of data lakes came into play, and it came more or less at the same time as that NoSQL or document-based databases was starting as well. And I think a lot of people confuse both. It is true that data lakes is kind of this approach of saying, well, there's a database, we just throw everything inside, whether it's documents or images or videos or databases itself, tables of data. And then, things will sort itself out. Well, that's not quite the reality of things, but in essence, for a typical business, and by typical business, I'm not talking about a business that is trying to measure video and image, the binary data that a video or an image contains, but actually examining financial documents, data documents, IoT documents, that type of thing. That structured data is just as good as non-structured data. But it's not the point of structured versus non-structured. The point is, can we aggregate those things fast enough to give you a nice bar chart or a pie chart or a line chart, or whatever? Can we divide this by that to give you a ratio, a KPI of sorts? That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is however you have that data, that we can get a metric out of it, that we can list all the countries or regions or dimensions of your chart or your table fast enough and clean enough so that your dashboards make sense and that you can make informed decisions. That's ultimately the goal. So we use a variety of techniques. The first is obviously we clone the data source, or what you tell us to clone from the data source, and that we break the dependency on the source system. So again, some examples is if, and I think I may be talking about that a little bit later, where you break the connection between that and the data source, gives you more freedom, and it gives you all the history of that data. And that's very important as well, because as we have seen in the past, let's say you're in a marketing situation, you're trying to get your Google Analytics, you're trying to get your LinkedIn and your Facebook ads and your Google ads and things like that, but you're dependent on those systems giving you the results and the dashboards they built. But if you want to mix that with your own data, or you don't like the way it's presented, or you'd like to automate that distribution, then you'd look at a solution like ClicData. But what happens if one day Google decides, you know what, I'm not going to let you access more than 6 months worth of data? Or, and this, by the way, happened several times with LinkedIn and Facebook as well, where they start, asking you to pay more to get to your own data, your historical data from 2, 3, 4 years past. So, it's been going back and forth, but in sense, by storing it elsewhere, it gives you that historical data and it will allow you to remain independent. And if one day you don't want to use, uh, let's say Facebook goes away and you're focused more on Twitter or whatever, you can switch that quite easily because you've created that layer of separation in the two. So the way we really do it is we clone the data as much as possible into ClicData. And then it is a little bit like ELT, where once it is loaded, you can just transform it or visualize it right away. You don't have to build a cube. You don't have to say this is the dimension, this is the date, and this is that, and this is this. It will. The system, for the most part, will attempt to understand and aggregate those metrics quite rapidly, using a variety of techniques, both on storage and both in memory, to give you as much as possible the fastest way of aggregation and showing that in a dashboard. And that, in essence, is how we do it. Now, this is a simplified version of that, and this works quite nicely if you have something like, okay, you know what, I have a database on this site, and I have so many rows, and now I want to copy that into, and to create a dashboard of those 3 or 4 or 5 rows, and build a dashboard. It should be easy to sync that up. But the issue comes when, okay, what happens tomorrow when I have an additional set of rows to load? Do I have to wipe my table and start again? And if you're doing a full load, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to basically wipe the table on ClicData and then reload the whole thing. And this works fine if you have a few rows, but it does not work fine if you have a large amount of data. It can be very slow for that, okay? But the pros of it is that you have an exact copy of what you have on your source system, okay? And we're going to go through this. We're going to go through this as an example on my demo here. Now, the delta load or partial load is a little bit different. Is yes, the first time around you use ClicData, you will load the full data set into ClicData. And then you go back to the query and say, okay, now that I've done that, let's do a delta, a partial load. And a partial load means I just want the new records that have been added since the last time I've done this. So, again, I'm going to go through an example of this, but think of it that, let's say, every day you want to add the number of rows of a table, let's say number of orders or invoices that have been published since the last time you did this. So let's say since yesterday. So the schematic here shows the orange as saying, okay, 2 new rows have been added. Can we just send those 2 rows as opposed to sending now 5 rows of data? That will make the transfer much more rapidly, and I could do it more frequently as well. So I can have more up-to-date data. I could, if I do this rapidly enough, I could do refreshes every minute. It's almost real time. Okay, and we'll talk about real-time data a little bit later, but for now, this is still, for all sense and purposes, a pool method. That means it's ClicData going to your source systems and pulling the data into ClicData, okay? But real world is not sometimes that simple, depending on how your database, depending on how the system is done, right? So we've seen sometimes, for example, in Google Analytics, we've seen this in a lot of other systems. And I usually discuss more financial and ERP systems, CRM systems, that type of system, database driven potentially. But that happens also in marketing, Google, where they restate some of their metrics. What happens is, as you have visitors on a high volume website, for example, you have a lot of visitors, and Google kind of has these buffers that they collect the number of visitors you're getting, but the processing is more in a batch mode, and sometimes the batch mode is a bit slower. They take a couple more hours to churn the numbers out. So and some of the data that comes in those buffers, sometimes it's a little bit delayed. So sometimes you'll say, okay, I have 50 visitors, and then, for yesterday, so that should be it. It's yesterday. You can't go back in time. And then you'll see, 51. Okay, how did you go back in the past and add me a visitor? And that's not necessarily that's what was happening. It was, well, not necessarily. It's for sure it was not, time travel is not yet feasible, but it's just a restatement saying that there was some data lingering around that we just got around to process it now. That happens quite a lot in, for example, in invoices, right? You issue an invoice, you send the invoice to the customer, the invoice says, I forgot to give you my PO number. Payments is not going to let this invoice being paid unless the PO is correct and the address. Can you change these two, please? So now you have to make sure that if that's a metric that you're synchronizing to ClicData, that you to go back and and re-update the invoice on ClicData. And that's a change, that's an update, that's a second case scenario. Okay. And then of course there's a delete, and the delete is even tougher, because delete, the record disappears, the row disappears from the data table. So how do we know something has changed? The row does not exist anymore. And then of course you have all the combinations of those: append and update, update and delete, append and delete in the same transfer. You could have all those. And of course the combination of all those together: append, update, and delete in the same transfer. So all these are all the different possibilities of how your data and your specific data clone in I4 can be updated, right? So this requires understanding on your part how your data is being refreshed, how is it being changed by the source system. Knowing that, we'll decide what best approach to take with ClicData. So in terms of append, update, and delete, let's look at those three. So taking the first line at the top there, you got a first initial load, you get your 3 rows in. This is like a full load. The next approach, you did an update and an append. In this case, you've modified the second row, and you've added 2 new rows at the bottom. And what you'd like to do is just send those 3 rows. You don't want to send all the other unchanged rows and then have that reflect here. And now in this case, the bottom case, which is the delete, you've deleted the row. How would you send something that does not exist anymore? Okay. So we're going to talk about a concept here that's called soft deleting, which is ignoring the row, but not all the way. And some systems have this. On some systems, you'll be able to do this. Others, you can't. When you delete, you delete. But if you can have some kind of a flag on the row that is marking, hey, this has been deleted. And by the way, most systems, especially if they're financial, you should have a transaction log. You can't just delete invoices willy-nilly. You have to make sure that there's a log, a transaction somewhere. So you will have this, maybe not on the table itself, but maybe it's on another table, the log table that said, hey, this table has been modified. This record has been deleted. So maybe you can use that table as well. And what you do is you convert that delete into an update instead. You do the same thing. You send, hey, this record has been deleted, meaning I've updated the deleted date or the deleted flag to say, yes, it's been deleted. So now I've sent that. So that's one way to do it, okay? Now there is a different way to do it using APIs. So delta loads, just to recap a little bit on the delta loads. Delta loads are excellent because they minimize the amount of data that you transfer on every refresh, therefore faster transmission. But they are a little bit more complex to implement. You need to understand how the tables are being refreshed on the data source, and you need to pick the right approach on with ClicData. So at this point in time, knowing how the data is modified and whether you want to include updates, appends, and deletes is one thing. Always the way to go is a full data load if your data set has become corrupt and not usable because you've done too many appends, etc. But there's ways that you can now mention, kind of detect if additions and changes for delta loads. So one way is assuming that you have a table that is sequentially numbered. Every row has a sequential row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Now this does not work with any other type of like UIDs and things like that. That does not work. Those are not sequential. However, some databases do have sequential GUIDs. Now, the second method is if somewhere on the data set that you're working with, there is a last modified date, a created date. Those are great as well, because we know the last time we've done a refresh on ClicData side. We can just say, okay, well, just give me anything that's been added or updated. And by the way, updated could also mean that soft deleted method that we discussed since last time I ran the data refresh, and it will just return those rows. And the third method is using some kind of transaction log, which we touched upon a little bit, which is to say there's another table somewhere that tells you that modifications, deletions included, have been done on row 2, 4, and 5. And that log will tell you by doing a join that, okay, I need to pull rows 2, 4, and 5 again, because the transaction log tells me that they were modified. So these are 3 methods to detect additions and changes to your source table, and that you can use to then modify your query to bring that in. Real-time additions and updates and additions, updates, and deletions. We talked about with a delta partial load, you can go as quickly as 1 minute refreshes pools of data in ClicData using our scheduling system. We don't go faster than that, because frankly, it does take that long anyway to detect duplicates and cleanse the data and do the things we do in the back end. Anyway, it takes at least a few seconds depending on volume. And again, because of volume, we don't know if we're going to get just a few rows or maybe 1,000 rows. So 1 minute is kind of the minimum time slice there. So if you want to do real time, then you can use the API. Now, the API, you need to do the work on the source system. So whenever the source system deletes a row, you have to call our API and say, delete this row, please. When something has been updated on the source system, you have to call the update API on our system. Please update this row with these values. And the same thing, this new row has been appended. Please append this row to this data set. These are the values. So you can achieve real time using the API, but that's not what we're talking about mostly today. We're talking about partial and full data loads. Just one final note before we get into the data refresh types, then the demo. So final note, updating needs a key. If you have determined that your data set needs an update, then you do need a key. A key is a column or a combination of columns that put together uniquely identify the row of data, so that when we get that data, we know, okay, I need to update. I know exactly which row to update. Okay, so we're gonna go into that. And finally, just so you know, this is the data refresh types that we have: recreate, reload, append. If you do not have that unique key, then you'll notice that the last 2, update and append update, because of the update, are disabled. You do need that unique key for them to be disabled. Just a quick note here: if you load your initial data and then you decide I want a unique key, ClicData will first make sure that there's no duplicates in there. You are not going to be able to add the unique key and keep the duplicates in there. Obviously, they need to be unique. So when you do that, there will be a message saying, and we'll see. I think I can recreate that message when I do the demo, which is now. Now this is a very simple demo, and I'm going to go through the basics first for those of you that that have a little bit of an understanding of SQL and database. I'm using Microsoft SQL Server as an example. This is a database on my side. I'm going to share my screen here. Just quickly, going through this, I'm going to show you this table here. It's called the fruits table. It's a table that's going to have 3 values in there, just very simply. It looks like this. It's got an ID 1, 2, 3. It is a unique sequential one. There's a transaction date. This happened on this date, where maybe I sold or bought or something like that. Something very simple. Again, I'm doing this for the purpose of clearly explaining this, especially for those that are just getting into ClicData and to the refresh. There's a price here and the last modified, which right now is empty. There's nothing there. Okay, it has never been modified. So these are 3 rows of data that I have for which I'm going to bring into ClicData. So I'm just going to look for my connections somewhere here. I'm using the data loader. And I'm going to connect to it. And there's my fruits table. And I'm going to select the columns there and give it a quick preview here. And basically in ClicData, I see the same thing I see on my local database. Okay, so I'm just going to bring that across. Now, this is a full initial load. If you notice my query, I'm selecting all the rows that I have. I'm not putting any parameters, any limitations on it. I'm just going to say, bring everything that I have, and let me know. I should have a virtual clone copy of what I have on my local database. Okay, so if you can see both of them, I'm just going to limit this here. Okay. So with that in mind, what happens now? Let's say a day goes by, and now I have. So again, I have these 3 transactions record. Let's say a day goes by, the next day comes along, and I have a few more transactions in place. All right. So now, if I look at my table on the source side, I have 5 rows, again sequential, different different fruits and different prices, etc. And what I want to do is update fruits here. Now, clicking on the refresh button, you'll see that I can do a recreate and a reload. So just looking at the recreate first, the recreate and the reload are very similar. The difference is recreate will destroy the table completely and recreate it with a new schema. Now, this only works if you have a select star or or you've selected all the columns, or if it's an API and we've added new columns or you've selected new columns. Okay. A reload leaves the table exactly the way it is currently in ClicData and tries to do matching of the columns to make sure that the names are still the same and puts those columns that are the same, it loads the data for those columns. If you have changed the query or you've changed your data source, for example, deleted a column, then that column, the query will fail if you ask for that column specifically, or if you did a select star, in this case using a database, then you will ignore that column. You will leave it on your current ClicData account, but ignore it during transfer. Now, this is great because sometimes database changes on your side, but you still want to keep the historical data that you had on that column. Maybe you never know. Maybe one day you will have that column back, or it still serves a purpose historically speaking. So by just doing a reload and just ignoring that column, we're able to keep that data in there for you. We don't destroy it. And then you'll notice that the third option is append. Now, the problem with append, if I do append here, you would think, is it smart enough to just append the 2 ones? Well, no, ClicData does not know that you've added these 2. There's nothing here that that is, explaining that is basically telling ClicData that these 2 rows have been added. So how can we tell ClicData that that is these 2 new rows need to be added? And for that, you need to change your query. If I had done append here, and I can do an append here, what's going to do, if we wait until it stops spinning, is append everything again. So we had the first 3 rows there, 1, 2, 3, and then it added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It did what we asked it to do. You ran the query against the data source, which is in our case a select all. If we go back to it, a select all columns, and it brought all those 5 columns because I've added 2 since yesterday, and it brought those across and appended them because it didn't know any better. So we needed to do something different. All right. So what we're going to do is we're just going to recreate this again, reset our load with a reload. So we should go back to 3 rows here. Okay. And we're going to now change the query we're going to add the 2 new rows that we've added since the last time we executed. So now here we have 5 rows, and we just want 2 new additional rows to be brought in to ClicData. So the way we're going to do this, so we did the full load, and now we can change this. And in this case, because it's aware, we are now able to just add a quick formula. So we're going to do maximum numeric column, which is our ID. So the name of the DC is fruits. Right. All right. So let me see, data aggregate, fruits, ID max. All right. What we're doing here is we're selecting all the rows of data, but this time we're limiting only where the ID is greater than the max of the ID that is currently existing in ClicData. So just looking at this into a little bit into perspective is we have 3 rows loaded into ClicData, and the maximum of ID would be this 3 here. Okay, that would be the last row we loaded there. So this function here, data aggregate fruits, is actually bringing us the number 3. That's the max. And what we're saying is we want anything higher than that, because we know that this is a sequential column. Therefore, if any rows have been added, they would have numbers 4, 5, and 6, etc. So let's make sure this is working. So if I do the preview correctly returns 4, 5. So I can save this, and now I change my schedule to do an append each time. And if I do this, it's just going to bring those 2 rows across each time it does this, right? So as soon as it's loading, I should see the 5 rows loaded because I've just appended. If I run it again, I have no new rows. I'm going to do another append. I have no new rows. It's not going to do anything because there's no new data to bring. It's still 5. It's not going to append anything else. So I keep running this every 5 minutes. And as a new row gets inserted, immediately it'll come across. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I didn't lose anybody on that. That is a very simple append scenario. So the next scenario I want to talk about is the case where we update historical data. Okay. The formula here is a little bit dependent on how your table is set up. But let's see what I'm going to do here. Currently, what's going to happen is a different scenario where not only am I going to insert a couple new rows 6 and 7, cherry and watermelon, but in the same day, there has been some corrections done to the data, some past corrections of data that I actually have already loaded into ClicData. And I'd like to make sure that those come across, okay? So I'm gonna do this, run this piece, and I'm gonna show you what it looks now in my transaction system. So first of all, expected that I see cherry and watermelon. These are 2 new rows. And then I noticed that I've changed the price on one of these items. And I've also used the last modified date time to indicate when I did that. So you'll see that I have a column here that will indicate that this record has been modified. I don't know exactly what's modified, but I know it was modified on this date, okay? And the same thing here. I also know I've changed the name of number 4, which used to be something else. Number 4 was banana. I've changed it to cantaloupe. And again, same thing. I've indicated that I have modified this. I don't know where one of these rows, one of these fields here, one of these columns has changed, and it was done on this date and time. Okay. So with this information, what I'd like to do, this is a case scenario where the table is set in such a way that updates and appends can be done and transferred at the same time. And more importantly, that updates in the past can be done to our data set. So I need to modify my query to be an update and an append query. Sorry, I'm just going to So the first thing to do is, and we discussed this on the last slides, is I need to make a unique key. Notice that if I do a refresh here, append and an update and the update are disabled. I cannot click on them because I need a unique key. So the first thing to do is to set up a unique key. The way to do that is you click on properties, you go to your schema, and you check the little key there for ID. And once you do that, you're going to get a little kind of a schema change confirmation screen to say the unique key has been modified, duplicated records will be removed. And again, another big red button to say, hey, we're going to remove duplicate records. So it has now applied the unique key to this table. And you'll see it because there's a little unique key here on all the columns that would form part of the unique key. In this case, I only have one column, so it's just the ID column. So with that in mind, now I could do, if I click on refresh, you'll see that update and append update are now enabled because it is possible now to update a record. Okay. So how do I bring these columns around? Well, there's two things I need to do. First of all, I need to change my query to say, listen, I want you to bring, yes, indeed, any new IDs that I've come across since the last one that I have. But I also need you to bring anything that has been modified in the past. So this is the piece where we kind of go, well, what do you mean the past? The past since when? Well, the past is the last time I've refreshed this data, right? So when was the last time that I refreshed this data? Well, fortunately, there's another macro for this, which is the last date time data was refreshed, which data info, last date time. So the name of the C is still fruits. It's still the same data clone. So this column here will actually bring me an entire date time column or sorry, field indicating when was the last time this data was refreshed, which was just a few minutes ago when I first when I loaded and appended these items here. So if I did that now, I should be able to bring the new data across. Now, I know I had a problem this when I first tried it. Well, I have a problem again. I have a feeling that one of the things that it does is bring actually an UTC date across. So in addition to this, I need to format this, if I remember correctly. And one would ask, hey, Talbot, why don't you make this kind of data info return the data in the right process? And one of the reasons is different databases, in this case, I'm working with SQL Server, actually have different ways of storing date time. So in my case, you noticed here that I've placed a system UTC date time, and it's a very specific command for for SQL Server. MySQL and other databases may have a completely different way of storing data. So we left this kind of formula-based and modular, but our professional services team can help you get the right formulas in there if you need it. But in my case, I'm just going to go with a day, month, like that, year, age, and seconds. Let's see if this works. Oh, macro formula does not exist. See, this is the last date. Taking wild guesses now. All right, let's see. Boom. All right. We want to grab all the new rows that have been appended since the last time I've ran this, or any rows that have been modified in the past. The past meaning since the last time I've refreshed the data. So now I save this. Again, I preview this to make sure I get the right results. And now I can actually do an append update. And what we should see here is the same result as we see here, which is 7 rows with the right prices uploaded, and with also the last modified date time and the new prices and names. Cantaloupe is no longer, sorry, banana is no longer banana, is cantaloupe. So we've now can schedule this. We can put this on a schedule and run it every 5 minutes, and we always get the new rows or the modified rows each time we run this refresh on this table. All right. So again, this is a little bit more technical than most of our webinars, but I hope you guys get a sense of the 5 different ways of refreshing data. I hope you understood as well in terms of what the need to understand where and how the data is being refreshed on your source systems. I think that's where you really need to focus in terms of understanding what is the best method to use in ClicData, depending on your data set, depending on the volume, depending on the complexity of your queries, and also depending on the ability of your source system to have some of these columns, like the sequential ID or the last time that the data was modified. If not, then the reload is really the only possible action you have here, because that's the only way for us to bring all the data across. With that in mind, thank you very much for watching. Again, this webinar will be available online on our website at www.clicdata.com/webinars. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. You all have my email. If not, you can reach out to the support team, support@clicdata.com, and they'll be able to help you out. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy.